Do you think the Middle Ages were all about shining armor, noble tournaments, and an unbreakable code of honor? Today we are going to destroy that romantic myth once and for all. We are transporting you to the very day when noble warfare turned into a cynical slaughter, and chivalry drowned in its own blood and mud. In this video, you will learn the terrible truth about a battle where a king gave an order that makes your blood run cold, to attack and trample his own allies just to get to the enemy. We will tell you how simple peasants with long knives went hunting for princes and dukes, turning the battlefield into a slaughterhouse for the elite. You will hear the story of a blind old man who launched a suicidal attack, tying his horse to the mounts of his comrades. But the most gruesome part awaits you ahead. We will reveal the details of a siege where people ate rats and boiled their own belts, and explain why the defenders of the fortress drove out 500 women, children, and elderly people to die an agonizing death in no man's land. Watch until the end to find out how a pregnant queen was forced to fall to her knees in the mud before her husband, trying to stop the executioner and save the living dead, whose execution was supposed to be the final chord of this drama. Get ready. This is not a fairy tale about heroes. This is a story about how efficiency killed humanity. Can you smell that? It is not just damp wool, sour wine, and horse sweat. It is the smell of animal fear that has soaked every inch of the ground on the hill of Ponthieu. Breathe it in deep. Here, in the tall grass, lies the answer to the question historians have been asking for 700 years. What is a knight's honor worth if it can be punched right through by a piece of yew wood and a goose feather? You are standing in the mud, and your fingers are gripping not a sword, not a scepter, but a simple, rough bow. Opposite you is the deadliest, richest, and most arrogant army in the Christian world. And you know that in a few hours, these magnificent riders in shining plate armor will be feeding the worms. But for now, silence. An ominous, ringing silence before the world turns upside down. Could you stand here, knowing that a steel avalanche weighing hundreds of tons is coming at you? The English army was cornered. These were not the brave conquerors of legend, but starving, exhausted men whose guts were turning inside out from bloody dysentery. They had been retreating for weeks, leaving behind a trail of burned villages and their own excrement. King Edward III, that cunning fox, understood. There was nowhere left to run. With his back to the forest of Crécy-en-Ponthieu, facing the inevitable, he placed his bet not on valor, but on geography and the pure, cold mathematics of killing. Look at this gentle slope. To a tourist, it is just a beautiful landscape. To a soldier, it is a perfect kill box, a death zone where every step costs a life. Saturday, August 26th, 1346. Remember that date. It is the day the Middle Ages began to die, even if they did not know it yet. Edward orders his knights to do the unthinkable. Dismount. Do you hear that clatter? Proud barons, earls, men whose lives have been spent in the saddle, climb down from their horses and shorten their spears. It is a shock. It is a violation of all the rules. A knight without a horse is like a bird without wings, you say? Number. On this day, a knight without a horse is an armored anchor meant to hold the infantry line. The king knows, if the archers waver, everyone dies. He puts his nobility in the mud, shoulder to shoulder with commoners. The social abyss vanishes in the face of death. Do you see how they are preparing the ground? This is not noble warfare. This is an engineering project for destruction. The English are digging holes, traps for cavalry, wolf pits covered with brushwood. One wrong step, and a horse's leg will snap like a dry twig, throwing the rider under the feet of the infantry. Edward arranges his archers in a sawtooth or wedge formation. It is brilliant and cruel. Anyone who tries to approach the center will find themselves in a crossfire. The arrows will hit not just in the face, but also in the exposed flanks. It is a conveyor belt. It is a machine. And the fuel for this machine will be the flower of the French nation. Now, transport yourself to the other side of the field. Do you hear that rumble? It sounds like an approaching tsunami. That is the army of King Philip VI coming. 20, maybe 30,000 men. No one counted exactly because chaos defies accounting. They are marching not as an army, but as a giant, glittering procession in a parade of vanity. Dukes, counts, the kings of Bohemia and Majorca, mercenaries, squires, everything is mixed into a heap. The gold on their cloaks shines so brightly it hurts the eyes. They are certain of victory. How could a bunch of ragged islanders withstand the best warriors in Europe? Philip VI is a king who wants to do everything right, but is a hostage to his own system. His scouts report, "The English have taken defensive positions. They are ready. Better not to attack today. Let the men rest. Bring up the supply wagons. Attack tomorrow at dawn." A sound thought, right? The king gives the order. "Stop! Halt the vanguard!" But try stopping a locomotive at full speed when the brakes have failed. The front ranks stop, but the rear ranks push forward. "Why are we stopping?" they shout from the back. "Do those cowards up front want to steal all the glory for themselves?" Pride. That is the real enemy of the French army. Every petty baron wants to be the first to plunge his sword into an English archer. Everyone wants the king to see his coat of arms specifically. They shove, they curse, horses rear up. Discipline? Forget that word. This is not tactics. This is a stampede in a burning theater, only everyone is rushing inside, into the fire. The king's order drowns in the roar of thousands of throats demanding blood. The formation falls apart before your eyes. They push forward, ignoring commands, logic, and the instinct of self-preservation. They see the English on the hill, sitting calmly and seemingly even chewing on their meager rations. It is infuriating. It is insulting. Look, they aren't even afraid of us. The sky begins to darken. This is not just a metaphor. Nature, as if sensing the approaching slaughter, changes the scenery. Clouds roll in, black as bruises on a corpse. Flocks of crows circle over the field with anxious cawing, anticipating a feast they haven't had in hundreds of years. The air becomes thick and electric. The smell of ozone mixes with the smell of manure. A storm is coming. And as the first heavy drops of rain begin to fall on the polished armor of the French knights and the simple linen jackets of the English archers, those who were supposed to be the first violin in this orchestra of death step onto the field. The Genoese crossbowmen. 6,000 professionals, the elite of the mercenary market. They walk forward, breathing heavily, their boots sinking in the soggy clay. They have marched almost 12 miles in full gear, dragging heavy crossbows and ammunition. But look closely. Something is missing. Where are their pavises? Where are those large shields they are supposed to hide behind while reloading? They were left in the baggage train, far behind, because the impatient French knights did not give them time to bring them up. "Forward!" the fat dukes scream at their backs. "Kill them!" The Genoese know it is suicide. Going against longbows without cover is like bringing a knife to a gunfight. But they have no choice. Behind them is a steel wall of French cavalry, ready to trample anyone who takes a step back. The heavens open. The downpour hits the battlefield with biblical fury. Water floods their eyes, turns the ground into a swamp, but the worst thing happens not to the people. The water soaks the bowstrings of the Genoese crossbows. They are made of sinew, and when wet, they stretch, losing tension. The weapon turns into a useless stick. Meanwhile, on the hill, under every English helmet lies a dry, coiled bowstring for a longbow. The English simply took them off and hid them. A small detail, a trivial trifle. But it is from such trifles that the foundation for a mountain of corpses is built. The storm thunders, drowning out the clatter of weapons, and in this cacophony of sounds, the Genoese take their last, fatal step forward, toward men who have already drawn their bows to their ears, preparing to release a swarm of death. The storm passes as suddenly as it began, leaving behind a world washed clean and ready for sacrifice. The clouds break, and the low evening sun strikes the Genoese in the eyes. Nature seems to be mocking the mercenaries. They are marching west, and the setting sun blinds them, turning the English positions into black, indistinguishable silhouettes against a blazing sky. And the English? They stand with their backs to the sun. For them, the enemy is perfectly illuminated, like a target in a shooting range. You squint, trying to make out anything at all, but see only blinding light and long, ominous shadows crawling toward you from the hill. The Genoese try to do what always worked in petty Italian skirmishes. They try to scare the enemy. 6,000 throats let out a wild war cry. It is supposed to sound terrifying, but here, on a field soaked in dampness and the anticipation of death, it sounds pathetic. The English do not flinch. Not a single muscle twitches, not a single horse snorts. Silence in response to a scream is scarier than any roar. The Genoese shout a second time, moving closer. Silence. A third time, and only then, having reached shooting distance, about 150 yards, do they raise their crossbows. Click. Thousands of triggers trip simultaneously. But instead of whistling death, only a dull, disappointing pop is heard. The waterlogged strings push the heavy bolts weakly. Projectiles that were supposed to pierce plate armor do not reach the English line, falling into the mud 30 feet from the target, or hitting the armor of the forward knights with the force of a thrown pebble. It is a fiasco. It is a technical collapse. At that moment, every Genoese realizes he is dead. He stands with a discharged, useless piece of wood and steel facing an army that has been waiting for just this moment. And that is when the English formation comes alive. It is not chaotic movement. It is the work of a single organism. Thousands of archers take one step forward, in sync, as if someone pulled the lever of a giant press. They raise their famous yew bows, weapons the French contemptuously called sticks for peasants, but these sticks have a draw weight of over 100 pounds. Try lifting a bag of cement with one finger. That is what an archer feels drawing the string to his ear. Jean Froissart, a chronicler of that era, left us a description that makes the blood run cold. The arrows fell so thick that it seemed like snow. But this is not soft snow. This is steel hail flying at speed with the sound of tearing fabric. An English archer is not a sniper. He is a machine gunner of the 14th century. He releases 10, 12 arrows a minute. A crossbowman barely manages one shot. Multiply that. 5,000 archers, 50,000 arrows a minute. This is a density of fire that Europe had never seen. Arrows with bodkin points, narrow, faceted, resembling a chisel, do not just wound, they ignore protection. They stitch through Genoese jackets, punch through chainmail, enter flesh, shattering bones. Do you hear that sound? It is not cries of pain. It is the sound of a butcher's hammer hitting a carcass. Thud, thud, thud. Men fall not one by one, Entire rows are simply mown down by an invisible scythe. Those who are still standing try to reload their crossbows, but how? You need to put your foot in the stirrup, wind the crank. That takes 30 seconds. They do not have those seconds. The second wave of arrows arrives before they can take a breath. Panic is a contagious disease, and it flares up instantly. The Genoese, the best marksmen of the Mediterranean, break. Not because they are cowards, but because they are professionals. They know how to calculate odds. The odds are 0. They drop their expensive crossbows. Some, in desperation, cut their bowstrings so the enemy cannot use their weapons. They turn and run. They run back, down the slope, away from this snowy hell, hoping to find salvation behind the backs of the French knights. They seek protection from their employers. They think the heavy cavalry will now open up, let them through to the rear, and allow them to regroup. What naivety. They are not running to salvation. They are running towards something that will prove more terrible than English arrows. The French vanguard, the flower of chivalry, watches this flight. What do they see? They do not see a tactical catastrophe caused by rain. They do not see men being shot down like targets at a range. They see rabble fleeing the battlefield. They see mercenaries who are paid in gold, daring to retreat without even engaging in hand-to-hand combat. To the proud Count of Alençon and his retinue, this is not a retreat. It is treason. It is an insult to their honor. How can this riffraff be allowed to block the path of noble lords? How can they wait for these cowards to get out of the way? Blood rushes to the heads of the French command. The knights lower their visors. The world narrows to a thin slit of vision. In that slit, they see fleeing Genoese preventing them from getting to the English. Horses snort, feeling spurs tearing their sides. The steel mass begins to move, but not toward the enemy. It moves toward its own side. The earth trembles, and this rumble drowns out the moans of the wounded. The slope of Crécy Hill turns into a sacrificial altar, where an act of unthinkable, suicidal madness is about to occur. One that will forever stain the concept of knightly honor. Imagine yourself in the place of a Genoese soldier. Behind you, English arrows whistle, biting into your back, and in front of you, a wall of destriers, war horses encased in armor, is rushing at you, with riders whose lances are lowered not at the English, but at you. You scream, "We're on your side!" But to them, you are no longer human. You are an obstacle, a road hazard, trash that needs to be cleared from the path to true glory. In this moment, squeezed between the hammer of English bows and the anvil of French arrogance, the Genoese understand the true price of their lives in the eyes of kings. It is equal to 0. And as the first hooves begin to trample living people into the bloody mud, somewhere in the center of the French formation, King Philip VI, looking at this chaos, finally loses his mind. His face twists into a grimace of rage, and an order breaks from his lips that will become the epitaph for an entire era. King Philip VI of France looks at the field, and his face fills with blood, dark as Burgundy wine. He does not see unfortunate men whose weapons failed. He does not see panic caused by the enemy's technological superiority. In his eyes, something far worse is happening. The sacred order of things has been violated. The rabble, these hired dogs, dared to turn their backs on the enemy in the presence of their sovereign. For a medieval monarch raised on chivalric romances, this is not a tactical retreat. It is a rebellion. It is a spit on the crown. In his head, clouded by fury and the noise of battle, a thought is born that seems to him the only correct, saving, and just one. Witnesses would later record his words, and they would sound like a sentence for the entire feudal system. Philip points a gauntlet-clad hand at his own soldiers milling about in the mud, and screams so loud he is heard even through the roar of the beginning slaughter. "Kill this rabble! They're just getting in our way and blocking the path for no reason." Think about that phrase. Getting in our way. 6,000 living people, professionals, fathers of families, instantly turn into an annoying hindrance. A pile of trash on the road that needs to be cleared with a shovel. And the shovel becomes the heavy French cavalry. The Count of Alençon and his knights, the flower of the nation, were just waiting for this permission. They hated the Genoese no less than the English. They envied their pay, despised their methods of war, and now, having received the royal blessing for murder, they lower their lances. Have you ever seen a heavy truck crash into a crowd at full speed? Transport that to the 14th century. A war horse, a destrier, weighs over half a ton. Together with the rider in full armor and the horse's own armor, it is nearly a ton of living battering ram rushing at 20 miles per hour. The impact of such a mass does not just knock you down, it smears you. The first row of French knights crashes into the backs of the retreating Genoese with a sickening, wet crunch. This is not a battle. This is an execution. The crossbowmen cannot defend themselves. Their shields were left in the baggage train. Their weapons are discharged, and the enemy is attacking from the rear. And this enemy is their ally. The knights slash right and left, hacking their way through living meat. Swords meant for noble duels slice open the light jackets of the mercenaries. Horses trample the fallen, turning their bodies into a bloody mess mixed with the mud of Ponthieu. The scream that rises over the field does not sound human. It is the howl of a trapped beast being eaten alive. "Betrayal!" the dying Genoese scream. "Treason!" But their voices drown under the hooves. French chivalry at this moment revels in its impunity. It seems to them that they are dispensing justice. They are punishing cowards. There is a twisted aristocratic logic in this. Honor is more important than life, especially if the life belongs to a commoner. They trample their own to get to the English, not realizing that they are digging their own graves. And what about the English? Imagine yourself at the top of the hill, in the line of archers. You see this theater of absurdity unfolding below. The enemy is killing itself. The French are destroying their own vanguard. Should you stop shooting? Should you let them finish this internal squabble? Absolutely not. For an English yeoman, this is a gift of fate. Keep firing! The order is short, like the crack of a whip. English bows rise again. Now the target has become even bigger, even denser. Below, a giant, writhing heap of men and horses has formed. The French knights, bogged down in the crowd of Genoese, lose their momentum. They stop to hack at their own side, and at that moment, they become perfect targets. English arrows begin to fall into this pile indiscriminately. They do not care whom they hit. A bodkin pierces a Genoese helmet? Great. An arrow finds a slit in a count's visor? Even better. This is cynicism of the highest order. The English are shooting into a porridge of bodies. Arrows nail still living crossbowmen to the corpses of their comrades. French horses, maddened by pain and the smell of blood, begin to buck, throwing riders right under the hooves of other horses. Chaos becomes absolute. Knights who a minute ago felt like masters of destiny suddenly realize they are trapped. They cannot move forward. The corpses of the Genoese are in the way. They cannot retreat. New waves of glory-hungry nobles are pushing from behind. And from above, An endless rain of English steel pours down on them. Look at this through the eyes of a forensic historian. This is the moment when noble warfare ended. Knights, these defenders of the faith, turned into madmen killing their own soldiers. And the English turned into cold operators of a death machine, disposing of the enemy on an industrial scale. There is no room for heroism here. There is only crushing, mud, and the efficiency of killing. Amidst this madness, King John of Bohemia, a blind old man, hears the sounds of the massacre. He asks his squires, "Where is my son, Charles?" They answer that the prince is likely fighting somewhere ahead. But the truth is, no one knows anything. The formation has crumbled. Control of the troops is lost. There is only the instinct of the mob to run forward, up the hill, toward death. French chroniclers would later try to justify this. They would write about confusion, about a devilish delusion. But let's be honest, this is not a delusion. This is a system. A system in which the life of a person without a title is not worth a bent penny. The Genoese did not die for France. They died because they became an inconvenient factor in the equation of knightly vanity. Their bodies literally became the foundation upon which the French nobility tried to climb to their doom. The ground beneath Crécy Hill by this point is no longer absorbing blood. It squelches underfoot, slippery red slush. Horses slip, fall, breaking legs. A fallen knight in heavy plate is a turtle flipped on its back. In such mud, under the weight of 60 pounds of steel, getting up by yourself is almost impossible, especially when others are running over you. They drown in mud, in the blood of their allies, while English arrows continue to drum on their armor like hail on a tin roof, finding vulnerable spots in armpits, groins, eye sockets. This was the point of no return. If before this moment one could still speak of a battle between two armies, now it had turned into the work of a butcher in a slaughterhouse. King Philip, who gave that order, signed a death warrant not just for the Genoese. He signed a warrant for his chivalry. He created a bottleneck, a jam, in which the entire might of France became stuck. The attack drowned in the blood of its own soldiers before it even reached the English positions. But they kept coming anyway, wave after wave, like lemmings jumping off a cliff. They saw the mountain of corpses in front of them, but honor did not allow them to stop. "Forward, in the name of Saint Denis!" What saint would accept such a sacrifice? What god would bless such madness? They scrambled over the bodies of the Genoese, tripped over the wounded who grabbed their legs begging for mercy, and received a boot or a sword in response. And at the top of the hill, Edward III and his commanders watched this, and perhaps could not believe their eyes. The enemy was doing all the work for them. The French themselves created a barricade of the dead in front of the English line, which was harder to overcome than any ditches or palisades, and this barricade kept growing with every minute, with every new thoughtless order, with every new arrow released by the calm, steady hand of an English yeoman. Death was put on a production line, and the conveyor belt worked without a hitch. But the worst was yet to come. The night was just beginning to take hold, and the meat grinder demanded new raw material, nobler than miserable mercenaries. The war machine launched on the hill of Crécy reached its design capacity. What happened next is hard to call tactics. It was an industry, a conveyor belt for recycling the aristocracy, working with monotonous, frightening efficiency. The French knights, having hacked their way through the grinder of Genoese bodies, finally broke out into the open. It seemed to them that the worst was behind them. The rabble was slaughtered. The road was cleared. Ahead were the hated English, just a couple of hundred galloping paces away. But those 200 paces became the longest road of their lives. The ground had turned into greasy, sucking glue. Destriers, Magnificent war horses, the pride of French stables, sank up to their fetlocks or even hocks. A dash? Impossible. An elegant maneuver? Forget it. The attack, which was supposed to be a swift lance strike, turned into a slow-motion nightmare. And at that moment, the English archers changed targets. Why try to pierce a hardened breastplate of a knight that costs a fortune, when underneath it is a huge, soft, sweating target? The horse. The English started hitting the horses. It was pragmatic, cruel, and absolutely effective. An arrow with a broad head hitting the chest or neck of an animal does not just kill. It turns half a ton of living muscle into an uncontrollable projectile. A wounded horse does not fall quietly. It thrashes in agony, rears up, kicks, throwing the rider and breaking the formation of those coming behind. Imagine being in the center of this crush. You are encased in plate. Your vision is limited to the narrow slit of a visor. You hear nothing but your own heavy breathing, the pounding of your heart, and the monstrous squealing of dying animals. And suddenly your horse takes an arrow in the eye. The world flips. You fly into the mud. The impact with the ground knocks the air out of your lungs. You try to stand, but your armor weighs 55, 60 pounds. The mud works like a suction cup. You flounder like an overturned beetle, and others fall on top of you. Men, horses, men again. You do not die by the sword. You die from suffocation. You drown in mud, in blood, pinned down by the bodies of your own comrades. The death of a knight at Crécy is not a heroic demise in a duel. It is death in confinement, in darkness, and in humiliation. Many noble lords, whose names thundered at tournaments from Paris to Rome, died without even drawing their swords. They were simply crushed by the weight of their own army. The English on the hill worked like robots. No emotions. Draw, release. Draw, release. Back muscles burn with fire. Fingers are rubbed raw to the blood, but the rhythm cannot be lost. Their life is in this rhythm. They see a rampart growing in front of their positions. At first, it was just mounds of bodies. An hour later, it became a real wall. A wall of dead men and horses. The French, attacking in the following waves, were forced to literally climb over the corpses of their fathers and brothers to get to the enemy. Chronicles tell us of 15 or 16 attacks. Think about that number. 15 times. This is not courage. This is mass psychosis. The French command lost touch with reality. They sent men into the attack not because they saw a chance for victory, but because they did not know how to stop. To stop meant admitting defeat by peasants with bows. To stop meant losing face. So they continued to throw the nation's elite into the furnace. Every time a new wave rolled onto this bloody reef, it shattered against the discipline of the English archers and dismounted knights. The few Frenchmen who managed to reach the English line were exhausted. They could barely hold their weapons. They slipped on the guts of their own horses. They were met by fresh, angry Welshmen with long knives, and English men-at-arms with shortened spears and war hammers. A hammer blow to the helmet, and even if the steel holds, the skull inside turns to jelly from the concussion. Twilight thickened, but the battle did not subside. On the contrary, the darkness added terror. Now the French could not even see where they were going. They walked toward the sound, toward the screams, toward the smell of blood. This was no longer a battle of two armies. It was a dog pile. The claustrophobia of the battlefield reached its peak. Men were pressed so tightly together they could not swing a sword. They strangled each other with their hands, stabbed daggers into armor joints, bit each other. Nobility? The code of chivalry? It all dissolved in the mud of Ponthieu. Only the animal instinct for survival remained, whispering, "Kill or die." The English archers, when they ran out of arrows, ran forward. In their light jackets, they were far more maneuverable than the clumsy knights. They pulled arrows out of corpses, out of the still living wounded, and ran back. Waste-free production of death. Some Welshmen, taking advantage of the turmoil, slipped between the men-at-arms and cut the tendons of French horses, or drove long knives into the unprotected groins of fallen knights. It was a war of extermination, where the victim's social status only fueled the killer's rage. By midnight, a mountain had grown in front of the English line. A gruesome, writhing mountain from which arms, legs, broken lances, and helmet plumes protruded. The French army had not just lost, it had destroyed itself against the English formation. The flower of chivalry, drowning in gold and silk, turned into building material for a barricade. Those lying in the lower layers of this pile died slowly, crushed by the weight of bodies piled on top. Their moans merged into a single, low hum, like the buzzing of a disturbed hive. Only instead of bees, there were dying people here. But in this ocean of death and madness, there were islands where drama played out not by the laws of statistics, but by the laws of personal tragedy and incredible, almost suicidal heroism. While thousands of nameless nobles drowned in the mud, on the right flank of the English army, a story was unfolding that was to be a lesson in brutal education for one boy and the final song for one old man. In the center of this new act of the bloody play was a 16-year-old prince, whom the world would remember as the Black Prince, and a blind king who came to this war not to win, but to die, as befits a legend. Their meeting was inevitable, like the collision of two comets in the black sky over Crécy. On the right flank of the English defense, something was happening that cannot be described with words from chivalric romances. Here, in the very epicenter of hell, a 16-year-old boy was taking the cruelest exam of his life. Prince Edward, later to be called the Black Prince, stood knee-deep in mud and blood. He was only 16. Nowadays, teenagers at this age take school tests, but he was taking a survival test against the best killers of France. The French knew who was in front of them. The golden leopards on his surcoat worked like a magnet. Capturing the heir to the English throne was a jackpot, a ransom that would set up one's grandchildren for life. And killing him meant beheading the enemy's future. They piled on him with all their mass. The Count of Alençon and the Count of Flanders, having broken through the rain of arrows, struck the prince's positions with the fury of the doomed. The English line buckled. The boy was knocked off his feet. Imagine the terror. You are lying on your back. A ring of enemies closes over you, and you see only raised swords and axes. His standard-bearer, Richard Fitzsimon, threw down the banner, an unheard-of thing, and stood over the fallen prince, fighting like a man possessed, protecting his master's body. At that moment, the life of the future hero hung by a thread, or rather, on the strength of the steel of his helmet. A messenger, pale as a sheet, broke through to King Edward III's command post. The king was watching the battle from the top of an old windmill. He saw the whole field in the palm of his hand, the chaos, the mountains of corpses, the desperate fighting on his son's flank. The messenger, gasping for breath, fell to his knees. "Sire, Earl Warwick and Earl Oxford beg for help. The prince is in trouble. The French are breaking through. A little more, and he will be killed." The king's answer went down in history as a model of Spartan pedagogy. But let's face the truth. It was the coldness of a predator. Edward III did not even turn his head. He asked in a calm, icy tone, "Is my son dead? Or is he so wounded that he cannot stand?" "No, sire, thank God, but he is in the thick of enemies and having a very hard time." Then the king spoke words that reek of the grave's chill. "Return to those who sent you, and tell them not to send to me for help so long as my son is alive. Tell them, let the boy win his spurs." Win his spurs. Think about that cynicism. A father throws his son into the furnace to temper his steel. This is not love, this is breeding. If the prince survives, he will become a warrior king who will be feared. If he dies, it means he was not strong enough for the crown of England. Edward was betting not on saving his flesh and blood, but on creating a legend. And the bet paid off. The prince and his men, realizing no help was coming, fought with doubled fury. The fury of men betrayed by their own, left to rely only on their swords. They stood their ground. But the boy who entered that battle died there, in the mud of Crécy. From it rose a cruel, cynical man who would soon drown half of France in blood. Meanwhile, on the other side of the field, in the French camp, a drama of a completely different sort was playing out. There, amidst panic and confusion, was a man who was the living embodiment of a fading era, John of Luxembourg, King of Bohemia. He was 50 years old, a very old man by the standards of that time, and he was blind. 10 years ago, a genetic disease took his sight, but not his thirst for battle. He heard the sounds of defeat. For a blind man, war sounds different, not like the glint of banners, but like cries of pain, the crack of breaking lances, and the stomp of running feet. He was told, "The Genoese are crushed, the French attacks are choking, the knights are fleeing." John understood. This is the end. A reasonable man in his place would have retreated. He would have saved his life, his crown, his army. But John was a knight of the old school. For him, life without honor was cheaper than the dirt under his feet. He turned to his retinue, to the flower of Bohemian chivalry. "Gentlemen, you are my friends and companions. I ask you for one last favor. Lead me into battle. I want to strike at least one blow with my sword against the enemy."
"Lead me far enough forward that I may reach the English."
It was a suicide request. To attack now meant going to certain death, but none of his knights refused. To deny a blind king the right to a dignified death would be a shame that could never be washed away. They did what seems like madness to a modern person, but was the highest expression of loyalty for a medieval person. The knights tied the reins of their horses to the bridle of the king's horse, left and right, creating a living chain so as not to lose their blind leader in the turmoil of battle. "Forward!" commanded the blind old man. And they rode. Not for victory, not for strategic advantage. They rode to die beautifully. This strange, tragic cavalcade crashed into the thick of the battle. Imagine, a blind king swinging his sword blindly, led by his loyal vassals straight onto English spears and arrows. They cut their way surprisingly deep. John perhaps even struck his cherished blow, feeling steel enter someone's flesh. But the outcome was foregone. The English infantry, knowing no pity or reverence for kings, surrounded them. Welsh knives and English glaives finished the job. In the morning, they would be found just as they rode into battle. King John and his knights lay dead, and their horses were still tied together by their bridles. A knot of loyalty that even death and looters could not sever. It was beautiful. It was grandiose. And it was absolutely pointless. The death of John of Bohemia became the final chord of chivalry as an idea. Blind courage, a noble gesture, self-sacrifice for the sake of a beautiful legend. All this shattered against the pragmatism of modern war. While the blind king sought one blow, an English yeoman methodically shot down his retinue from a safe distance. While the Black Prince learned to kill to survive, the old king died so as not to live with shame.
2 generations looked at each other across the abyss of death.
A young pragmatist thrown into the water by his father to learn to swim, and an old romantic who voluntarily stepped into that water with a stone around his neck. Edward survived and became a symbol of a new, efficient, and ruthless war. John died and became a symbol of a beautiful but useless fairy tale. The Battle of Crécy ground them both up, but spat out only one. Night descended on the field, covering the mountains of corpses with merciful darkness. The roar of battle gradually faded, replaced by the moans of the wounded, sounding like an endless, eerie prayer. The English stood their ground, tired, dazed by the amount of blood spilled, but victorious. The French army had ceased to exist. But for those left lying on the field among corpses and dying horses, the worst was just beginning.
New actors were entering the stage. Those for whom war was not a question of honor or tactics, but a way to earn a few coins by prying gold teeth from dead dukes.
When the roar of battle finally died down, a silence fell over the field of Crécy that was scarier than any noise. It was not the peaceful sleep of nature. It was a stunned, shell-shocked silence, occasionally interrupted by the death rattles of the dying and the distant, mournful howling of dogs. The moon, full and dispassionate, emerged from behind the clouds, illuminating a scene the human mind refused to accept. The hillside was no longer green. It was gray with steel and red with blood. Here, on a patch of land the size of a couple of football fields, lay the entire elite of France, piled in a heap. 1,500 knights, counts, dukes, 11 princes of the blood, the flower of the nation, cut down at the root. But for the victors, the night was just beginning, and it was not a night of solemn hymns.
It was the night of the jackals. From the English camp, like shadows from the underworld, came men whose names would never appear in chivalric romances. Welsh infantrymen, Irish mercenaries, simple archers. They had no coats of arms, no code of honor, and, most importantly, they had no pity. They went hunting. In their hands were not swords, but long knives and daggers, cynically called misericordes, daggers of mercy. The irony was that the mercy they brought was final and permanent. Imagine you are lying in this pile of bodies. You are a French count. Your armor, costing as much as a small village, saved you from the arrows. But now it is your prison. You are wounded, dehydrated, pinned down by the carcass of your own horse. You cannot move. You see a figure in a dirty leather jacket approaching you. In a normal world, the world that died this morning, this man would fall to his knees before you. He would take you prisoner, give you wine, bandage your wounds, and send a messenger to your wife for a ransom. A ransom for a man like you could provide this peasant with a comfortable old age. But here, in the darkness of Crécy, the economics of war broke down. The Welshman does not see you as a bag of gold. He sees an enemy who is still breathing. He sees your expensive rings, your gold chain, your belt with precious stones. Why drag a prisoner to camp, feed him, guard him, wait for a ransom for months if you can take everything right now? You try to say your name, wheeze your title. I am the Duke of... But he doesn't care. He doesn't even understand your dialect. He simply leans over, businesslike and calm, like a butcher assessing a carcass. He looks for a gap in your armor, armpit, groin, or the most terrible, the eye slit of the helmet.
He lifts your visor. You see his eyes, empty, tired, cold. And then, a strike. Quick, precise, professional. The blade enters the eye or throat. The misericord grants you eternal rest. This was not war. It was a social revolution committed with a knife. That night, peasants slaughtered the aristocracy. They walked the field, finishing off wounded grandees like sick cattle. The Duke of Lorraine, the Count of Auxerre, the Count of Blois, their blood mixed with the blood of low-born mercenaries, and in the moonlight, it looked equally black. For centuries, these people were taught that nobles were a superior race, chosen by God, untouchable. But when you drive a knife into a duke's throat, and he dies just as pitifully and quickly as your drunkard neighbor, the myth of divine right crumbles to dust. King Edward III, learning of what was happening, was furious, but not out of humanism. His anger was the anger of an accountant whose profit was stolen. Every dead count meant tens of thousands of florins lost. The English treasury was empty, the war was expensive, and these corpses could have covered the costs of the entire campaign. "They are slaughtering my money," the king could have exclaimed. But he could not stop his men. The machine of violence, revved up to the limit, has no brakes. The soldiers were taking revenge for hunger, for fear, for centuries of humiliation. They looted corpses with the greed of marauders. Knightly belts were torn off along with pieces of clothing. Fingers were chopped off to remove rings. By morning, the battlefield was a surreal sight. Naked, disfigured bodies of the French nobility lay in rows, their skin white against the black mud. Everything had been stripped from them: armor, silk, velvet, boots. Philip VI's Grand Army had turned into a spare parts warehouse and a second-hand shop for the English army. English archers now sported velvet doublets from someone else's shoulder and drank cheap beer from gold goblets. The social ladder had collapsed and been used for firewood. Edward III rode across the field of victors. His horse stepped carefully over the corpses of former friends and relatives. Yes, this was a civil war of European nobility, where everyone was everyone's cousin. He saw the body of the King of Bohemia. Edward dismounted, paying tribute to the old enemy, but it was a gesture for the audience. Deep down, he understood. The world had changed. The old rules no longer applied. Chivalry as a military force died here, in this mud. It was beautiful, it was brilliant, but it turned out to be absolutely uncompetitive against the efficiency and cruelty of the new age. The English counted their losses. They had lost maybe 100, 200 men. The French left over 10,000 on the field, a ratio of 1 to 100. History had never seen such a thing. It was not a defeat. It was an extermination. The news of the Battle of Crécy spread across Europe faster than the plague. Kings and dukes in distant castles turned pale, listening to the messengers' stories. If the flower of French chivalry was destroyed by a bunch of peasants, then who is safe now? Who will protect their castles if walls are breached by cannons and armor is pierced by arrows? But Edward did not intend to rest on his laurels. Victory in the field is good, but he needed a base. He needed a door into France that he could open and close at will. His gaze turned north, to the sea. There, on the coast, stood the fortress city of Calais. Rich, fortified, impregnable. A lair of pirates who had tormented English trade for years. "We are going to Calais," said the king. The soldiers, weighed down by looted goods, grumbled but formed into columns. They thought the worst was behind them. They thought that after such a triumph, the walls of any city would fall at the mere sight of English banners. How wrong they were. Crécy was a quick death.
Calais would be a slow, agonizing torture that would stretch for many months. There, by the walls of the seaside city, heroism would give way to starvation and tactics to attrition. The battle ended. The war for survival began, where the enemy would not be a man with a sword, but an empty stomach and a rat roasted over a fire. The victory at Crécy was a blinding flash of lightning that momentarily illuminated all the ugliness of the old world. But after the flash came thunder, dull and endless. Edward III, intoxicated by triumph, moved north to the coast. His goal, Calais. This city was not just a dot on the map, it was a thorn in England's side, a nest of corsairs who had plundered English merchant ships for decades, and, most importantly, it was the perfect gateway to France. A key Edward wanted to hang on his belt. The king thought that after the defeat of the main French army, the city would fall at his feet like overripe fruit. He was wrong. When the English vanguard saw the walls of Calais in September 1346, they realized this would be no cakewalk. The city was a fortress, surrounded by double moats and impassable marshes. To storm it meant sacrificing the remains of the army. So Edward made a decision that required not the hot blood of a warrior, but the cold patience of an executioner. He decided not to break the walls. He decided to strangle those hiding behind them. The longest and most agonizing siege in the history of the 100 Years' War began. While people behind the walls of Calais counted grain stocks with fear, something surreal was happening outside. Edward ordered construction. Not siege towers, not catapults, but houses. Around the besieged city grew a new city, a wooden double, which the English, with grim irony, called Villeneuve-la-Hardie, Town of the Brave. This was not a temporary campsite. It was a fully fledged town with paved streets, a market square, taverns, and even brothels. Ships with English wool, meat, and ale came here across the channel. Imagine this monstrous contrast. You are standing on the wall of Calais, staggering from hunger and looking down. A couple of 100 yards away, life is bustling. You hear music, drunken laughter, the clinking of coins. You smell roast pork, which the wind carries to you, mocking your empty stomach. The English were having a picnic on the edge of a grave. Their wives came from London. They held tournaments and fairs. For them, war had turned into a comfortable business trip with a view of dying people. It was psychological torture of the highest level. Edward told the garrison, "We are here forever. We have food, warmth, and time." "And what do you have?" The people of Calais had only time, and it was running out. The winter of 1346 was cruel. The cold wind from the English Channel pierced to the bone. Inside the city walls, life turned into a biological survival experiment. First, fresh meat disappeared. Then they ate all the horses. A war horse that cost a fortune was now valued only by the number of pounds of meat on its bones. Then came the turn of dogs and cats. When they ran out too, the hunt for rats began. A rat became a delicacy people fought over. By the spring of 1347, the city had turned into a crypt. People chewed boiled leather from their boots and belts, trying to trick their stomachs. Old people died quietly in their cold beds. Children stopped crying. They simply had no strength left. Jean de Vienne, the fortress commandant, watched this with horror. He was a brave warrior ready to die in battle, but he did not know how to fight the specter of starvation. And then he made a decision that in its cruelty rivals any atrocity on the battlefield. It was the logic of military necessity, devoid of any humanity. To prolong the agony of the garrison, The ballast had to be discarded. Useless mouths. A terrible term that went down in history. Women, children, the elderly, cripples, the poor, everyone who could not hold a sword or draw a bow was declared surplus. They consumed a resource needed by soldiers. The commandant ordered them expelled from the city. Imagine the scene. The gates open, and a crowd of emaciated, skeleton-like people, about 500 of them, is pushed out. They walk, staggering, toward the English positions. Hope glimmers in their eyes. They think the English, seeing their condition, will let them through. After all, that is Christian charity, isn't it? But Edward III stands in the way. At the beginning of the siege, he might have let them pass, playing at nobility. But now, after long months of stubborn resistance, his patience had snapped. He saw this as an enemy trick. The French wanted to save food to hold out longer. "No," said the king. English pikemen closed ranks, blocking the way. "Back!" they shouted. The crowd turned in horror toward the walls of their native city. "Let us in!" they begged. "There is food there! Our husbands and fathers are there!" But the gates of Calais were shut tight. Jean de Vienne could not let them back in. He had already written them off. He had already distributed their rations among the soldiers. And so, 500 people were trapped. In a narrow strip of no man's land, between the water-filled moat and the palisade of the English camp, under the open sky, in front of two armies. It was a reality show of death. By day, the sun scorched them. By night, the rain froze them. They screamed, begged for bread, begged for death. Their relatives looked at them from the walls, powerless to help. From the camp, well-fed English looked at them, chewing their rations. They died slowly. First the weakest, children and the elderly, then the women. They ate grass, drank dirty water from puddles, gnawed the earth in the madness of hunger. A week later, the screams died down. Only piles of rags and bones remained. Neither side flinched. No one threw them even a crust of bread. For the commandant, it was a sacrifice for defense. For the King of England, a tool of pressure. The death of these people was meant to break the spirit of the defenders. You ask, how could people be so cruel? The answer is simple. War shuts off empathy. The person on the other side is not a person. They are an obstacle. And the useless mouths were an obstacle for both sides. Their death was just a statistic in the combat log. This episode under the walls of Calais showed the true face of medieval war far more vividly than the shine of knightly armor. There was no glory here. There was only cold, calculated inhumanity. And the siege continued. The bodies in no man's land decomposed, poisoning the air with cadaveric venom. But Jean de Vienne held on. He waited. He sent messengers to his king, Philip VI. "Sire, we are eating our horses. We are dying, but we are holding. Where is your army? Where is the salvation of France?" Philip was gathering troops, slowly, clumsily, struggling to find money. France was bled dry. But still, a huge army began to gather to relieve Calais. Hope flared in the hearts of the defenders when French banners appeared on the horizon. The king was coming to help. It seemed the suffering had not been in vain. But history had prepared one more blow for the people of Calais, a blow of betrayal that would hurt more than any hunger. Hope is the cruelest of feelings. It can kill faster than a knife if suddenly taken away. In the summer of 1347, the residents of Calais stood on the walls and wept with happiness. On the horizon, glittering with gold and azure, flew the banners of the French army. King Philip VI had returned. He brought a huge host to lift the siege, smash the English,
and save his loyal subjects. It seemed a year of suffering, hunger, and eating rats was not in vain. Salvation was so close one could touch it. But Philip VI looked at the English fortifications. He saw double moats, palisades, cleverly positioned units of archers. He saw Edward's resolve. And then he looked at his treasury, empty as a beggar's stomach. The King of France, defender of the faith and sovereign of these people, made his choice. He did not attack. He turned his horse around. The army, flashing its armor in farewell, began to leave. Have you ever heard the sound of a whole city's will breaking? It is not a scream, it is an exhale. Thousands of people on the walls exhaled simultaneously. And in that sound, the last hope died. The king had abandoned them, betrayed them, left them to be torn apart by the wolf that had been sitting at the doorstep for a year. Jean de Vienne, the commandant, came down from the wall with a face gray as ash. Now there was only one way out, to surrender to the victor's mercy. But did he know that the victor had no mercy? Edward III was furious. He wanted a pitched battle, wanted to humiliate Philip finally, and he just ran away. The English king decided to vent all his accumulated bile, all the frustration of a year sitting in the mud, on the miserable city. When the parley party came out of the gates expecting standard surrender terms, saving the lives of the garrison and residents in exchange for the city, they heard a sentence that made their blood run cold. The city will be looted, the garrison executed. The inhabitants sold into slavery or slaughtered. It was the standard law of war for those who resisted too long. But Edward, being a sadist with an imagination, left a small, humiliating loophole. "I will spare the city," he said, clenching his jaw, "if 6 of the most noble, richest, and respected citizens of Calais come out to me. But they must come out not as ambassadors. They must come out in only their shirts, barefoot, with uncovered heads. Around each one's neck must be a rope, and in their hands they must carry the keys to the city and the castle. With these 6, I will do as I please." The condition was monstrous. Edward demanded not just lives, he demanded ritual humiliation. He wanted to see the elite that funded this defense turn into cattle ready for slaughter. He wanted to break the pride of Calais over his knee before taking the city itself. Everyone who could still walk gathered in the market square of Calais. The commandant read the ultimatum. The silence was such that you could hear the wind chasing dry dust across the cobblestones. Who would go to die? Who would voluntarily put a noose around their neck to save the rest? The crowd wept. And then the richest man in the city, Eustache de Saint-Pierre, stepped forward. "It would be a great pity to let this people die of hunger if I can save them," he said in a voice devoid of pathos. "I give myself into the hands of the King of England." Jean d'Air, the second richest, followed him. Then Jacques de Buisson and his brother Pierre. Then 2 more. 6 men. 6 shadows that just yesterday were masters of life, merchants, judges. Now they took off their velvet doublets, their fur hats, their soft leather boots. They remained in simple linen shirts, barefoot on the cold stones. Imagine this journey. The gates open. 6 figures, thin from hunger, with ropes around their necks, the symbol of criminals sentenced to hang, walk slowly through the enemy camp. English soldiers, well-fed, drunk, cackle and point fingers at them. "Look, here comes the meat!" Scraps are thrown at them. They are spat upon. Mud and sharp stones cut their bare feet, but they walk with their heads held high. This is a procession of the doomed, but there is more dignity in their humiliation than in the entire gilded retinue of the English king. They approach the royal tent. Edward sits on a camp throne, surrounded by his barons and knights. Beside him stands his pregnant wife, Queen Philippa. The 6 citizens fall to their knees in the mud. Eustache de Saint-Pierre holds out a bunch of heavy iron keys. "Noble king," he says, "here we are before you. We give ourselves to your will, to save the poor people of Calais." Silence reigns in the camp. Even the most hardened English barons, who saw the massacre at Crécy, feel a lump in their throats. There is something biblical in this self-sacrifice, something that pierces the armor of cynicism. Many knights begin to weep, seeing these emaciated old men ready to die for their neighbors. Sir Walter Manny, one of Edward's best commanders, steps forward. "Sire, restrain your anger. You are a king. Your reputation should not be stained by such cruelty. If you kill these men, the world will condemn you." But Edward does not hear. He looks at them not as a knight, but as a vengeful owner from whom these people stole a year of life and a pile of money. His eyes burn with cold hatred. He remembers dead friends, remembers expenses, remembers the humiliation of the long siege. "Silence, Sir Walter," the king snarls. "They killed many of my men. They must die. Executioner, call the executioner immediately. Cut off their heads right here." The air pulls tight like a bowstring before a shot. The executioner steps forward, toying with a heavy sword. The 6 citizens bow their heads, awaiting the blow. The crowd of English nobles freezes in horror. The king is about to commit an act that will forever brand him a tyrant. No one dares to object to the mad monarch. No one, except one woman who understands that something more than the lives of 6 Frenchmen is at stake right now. It is a moment when history froze in balance between a bloody reprisal and unexpected salvation, and only the one carrying the future of the dynasty under her heart could tip the scales. The silence hanging over the English camp rings with tension, like an overwound crossbow string. The executioner, a huge hulk with a face devoid of any expression, is already testing the sharpness of the blade with his finger. The 6 citizens of Calais, barefoot in only their shirts, kneel in the cold mud. The ropes around their necks rub their skin raw. They do not look at the king. They look at the ground, saying goodbye to life. Edward III, the victor of Crécy, the man who brought France to its knees, now looks not like a noble monarch, but like a butcher demanding blood for his losses. His knights, even the cruelest, look away. To kill unarmed men who surrendered voluntarily is a stain no victory can wash away. Sir Walter Manny, having just received a rude refusal, retreats into the shadows, biting his lips. No one else dares say a word. The sentence is final. The king craves a public execution to terrify the whole world. And at this moment, when the axe is ready to fly, something happens that does not fit into any military manual. Breaking through the line of men-at-arms, clanking with iron, comes not a warrior, but a woman. Queen Philippa of Hainault. She is breathing heavily. She is in the last month of pregnancy. Her belly is huge. She carries the future of the Plantagenet dynasty within her. Have you ever seen time stop? This is that moment. The queen, ignoring the mud, ignoring court etiquette that forbids such humiliations, sinks heavily to her knees, right in front of her husband. It is a shock. The Queen of England in the mud, before a crowd of soldiers and commoners. She is crying. And these are not the quiet tears of a lady in a tower. These are the sobs of a woman desperately trying to prevent a catastrophe. "Oh, my lord!" Her voice breaks, but in the silence everyone hears it. "Since I crossed the sea in great danger, I have asked you for nothing. Now I humbly ask you, for the sake of the Son of Saint Mary, and for your love for me, to have mercy on these 6 men."
Think about what she is doing. This is not just an emotional outburst. It is a brilliant, intuitive political move. She puts Edward in a hopeless position. She mentions the danger of crossing the sea, reminding him that she risked her life and the heir's life to be here, beside him. She invokes the Virgin Mary and God, turning the execution into sacrilege. If Edward gives the order to the executioner now, he will not just kill 6 Frenchmen. He will refuse his pregnant wife. He will insult heaven. He will bring bad luck upon his unborn child. In the medieval mind, steeped in superstition, denying a pregnant woman such a request means guaranteeing a curse. Edward looks down at her. His face is a mask of internal struggle. His jaw muscles are working. He is furious. He wants to kill these people. He hates them for their stubbornness, for the empty treasury, for the cold nights under the walls of Calais. But a wall stands before him that he cannot break with his sword. That wall is his wife's tears and superstitious fear of divine retribution. Seconds pass that feel like hours. Only the king's heavy breathing and the queen's sobs are heard. Edward shifts his gaze from the executioner to his wife, then to the condemned. Annoyance reads in his eyes. He is cornered by mercy. He realizes he has lost this round. If he executes them, he is a tyrant and godless. If he spares them, he is a weakling who gave in to women's tears. But of 2 evils, he chooses the one that will save his soul, even if it wounds his pride. "Ah, lady," he finally says, and grinding teeth can be heard in his voice. "I wish you were anywhere but here. You ask me so hard that I cannot refuse you. I give them to you. Do with them as you please." He does not say, "I forgive them." He says, "Take them out of my sight." He dumps the responsibility on her. It is the gesture of Pontius Pilate washing his hands. The king turns abruptly and goes into his tent, seething with anger. But the deed is done. The executioner lowers his sword. Philippa does not lose a second. She rises from her knees, and her ladies-in-waiting immediately support her. She orders the ropes removed from the necks of Eustache de Saint-Pierre and his comrades. She commands them to be taken to her chambers. There, in the warmth of the royal tent, a surreal transformation takes place. 5 minutes ago, these people were nameless cattle destined for slaughter. Now the Queen of England personally sees to it that they are fed, dressed in new clothes, and given money. Skeptics will say, it was theater. Good cop, bad cop. The king scares, the queen pardons, and everyone is happy. The people see the king's strictness and the queen's kindness. Possibly. Medieval politics was full of such spectacles. But look at the details. A pregnant woman in the mud. The risk of miscarriage from stress. Tears seen by hundreds of rough soldiers. No. In that moment, it was real. It was the only time in this entire bloody campaign that humanity defeated state necessity. Edward was a war machine, but Philippa found the off switch for that machine. The 6 citizens of Calais were saved. They survived, having gone through the hell of hunger, shame, and fear of death. They were released, given letters of safe conduct. But do not be in a hurry to get sentimental and wipe away tears. This is not a happy ending to a Disney fairy tale. It was just an episode of mercy in an ocean of cruelty. 6 men saved their heads, but they did not save their city. As soon as the euphoria of saving the heroes passed, reality returned with doubled force. Edward kept his word. He did not massacre the population. But his mercy was worse than the sword.
He did not trust the French. He did not want to rule a city that would hate him and stab him in the back at the first opportunity. He did not need subjects. He needed a base. He needed a little England on the French coast. Therefore, while the saved citizens were eating their first normal meal in a year, heralds were already galloping through the streets of Calais. The king's order was short and brutal. Out. Total deportation. All residents of Calais, men, women, children, rich and poor, had to leave the city. They were allowed to take only what they could carry in their hands. Imagine this picture. Thousands of people, exhausted by the siege, walk out of their homes. They leave furniture, supplies, family heirlooms, workshops where they worked for generations. They walk toward the gates, looking back at their native walls, which will now become foreign. It was an exodus. A huge column of refugees stretched away from the city, dissolving into the French hinterland, carrying with them only memory and hatred. And into the empty city, still keeping the warmth of the exiles' hearths, new masters began to enter. Edward invited English merchants, craftsmen, soldiers with families. "Come to Calais," shouted heralds in London and Dover. "Here are ready houses, here are low taxes, here is an excellent port." And they went. It was colonization in its purest form, replacement of the population. A couple of months later, French speech was no longer heard in Calais. Signs changed to English. Laws became English. The city was stolen whole, along with the foundation. So ended this drama. The rescue of the 6 citizens became a bright, emotional point in the history of the siege, a beautiful legend that poets would sing and sculptors would mold. Remember Rodin's famous statue. But behind this legend lay a cold, pragmatic truth. Mercy to a few does not cancel out cruelty to thousands. Philippa saved 6 lives, but Edward destroyed the soul of the city, turning it into a military outpost that would be a thorn in France's side for another 200 years. Now, as the gates of Calais slammed shut behind the backs of the last French refugees, and banners with leopards and lilies rose over the towers, one could sum up. The Battle of Crécy and the fall of Calais were not just military episodes. These were tectonic shifts after which the landscape of history changed forever. The old world of knightly honor, beautiful gestures, and feudal loyalty lay in the mud of Ponthieu, pierced by an English arrow, and on its corpse, a new world was being built. A world of professional armies, total war, and ruthless efficiency. It only remained to understand what lesson humanity would learn from this. Spoiler, none. It would simply learn to kill even faster. The clatter of hooves of the last French exiles died away in the distance, and a new silence descended on Calais. But this was not the silence of peace, but the silence of a shift change at a factory. The city emptied. Edward III, that pragmatic architect of a new reality, did not intend to play the kind feudal lord. He did not need loyal Frenchmen who had to be constantly tested for fidelity. He needed a clean slate, a concrete foundation for an English outpost where every stone and every person would work for the crown. The king signed a decree that finally turned military victory into demographic engineering. Calais must become English, completely, to the last nail in the wall. Ships stretched across the English Channel, but now they carried not archers and siege engines, but merchants, weavers, innkeepers, and masons with their families. People from London, Kent, and Bristol were promised tax breaks, free houses, still warm from the previous owners, and huge opportunities. And they went. This was the greatest colonization of the 14th century. In a matter of months, the French port city turned into Little England. On streets where French speech had sounded for centuries, Rough English talk was now heard. Signs changed. Churches were reconsecrated. Calais became, as one contemporary later put it, the brightest jewel in the English crown. And Edward soldered this stone into the crown tightly. Just think, this city would remain English for 211 years. 2 centuries.
Kings would be born and die. Dynasties would change. The Wars of the Roses would begin and end. And the flag of St. George would still fly over Calais. It was a base, an unsinkable aircraft carrier of the Middle Ages, moored at the enemy's shore. From here, English armies would launch their plundering raids. Loot would be brought here. The wool trade would flourish here. Edward proved, to own a country, you do not need to capture it entirely. It is enough to hold a knife to its throat. And Calais became that knife. But the consequences of this campaign extended far beyond redrawing borders. If you climb Crécy Hill today, you will see only peaceful fields and windmills. Grass has long hidden the bones, and farmers have plowed over the mass graves. But it was here, on this dirty slope, that a tectonic shift occurred, the echo of which is heard to this day. The Battle of Crécy and the fall of Calais were evidence of the death of an entire universe, the universe of chivalry. Until August 26, 1346, war was an elite sport. It was a high-stakes tournament where noble lords fought each other according to certain rules, exchanged prisoners, and drank wine after the battle. A knight was the tank, airplane, and nuclear warhead of his era rolled into one. He was invulnerable to the rabble. He was the master of life and death. The English longbow broke this order over its knee. Suddenly, it turned out that years of training, a code of honor, a pedigree 5 centuries long, and armor costing 3 villages, none of this matters. All of this can be destroyed in a second by an illiterate peasant who simply knows how to draw a U-stick well. Technology defeated tradition. Efficiency killed aesthetics. This was the very moment when the matrix of feudalism suffered a glitch that was impossible to fix. The knight on the battlefield turned from predator to prey, into a huge, clumsy, canned target. Look wider.
Crécy showed that war is no longer the business of aristocrats. It has become the business of the people. The English army won not because it had more noble lords, but because it was a professional machine where every cog, from prince to archer, knew its task. Discipline beat arrogance. Tactics destroyed personal valor. The blind King John of Bohemia, rushing into a hopeless attack, was beautiful in his heroism, but absolutely useless. And the nameless Welshman cutting throats in the mud was ugly, but devilishly effective. And history chose the Welshman's side. Europe changed forever. Kings realized, to survive, one must rely not on capricious vassals, but on mercenaries, on infantry, on those who fight for money, not for glory. The era of mercenary armies began, an era that would lead to the emergence of regular troops and total wars. The mercy that Queen Philippa begged for the sick citizens remained only a beautiful exception confirming the rule. The new war knows no pity.
There is no place for nobility in it if it interferes with the result. We often romanticize the Middle Ages. We imagine shining plate armor, fluttering banners, honor, and courage. But the truth revealed to us by the field of Crécy is far more prosaic and cruel. Chivalry did not die in bed of old age. It was shot from a distance of 200 yards and then finished off with a knife in the eye socket while it floundered in its own blood and manure. It died because it turned out to be unprofitable. Edward III's victory became a triumph of pragmatism over romance. He showed that in war there are no rules, except one. The winner is the one who kills better. And we, people of the 21st century,
are direct heirs of this philosophy. We inherited not King John's code of honor, but the cold calculation of English archers. We learned to kill from a distance without seeing the enemy's eyes.
We learned to call mass murder tactical necessity. We perfected the assembly line of death, the first prototype of which was launched on the hill in Ponthieu. And now, standing on the ruins of this old era, I want to ask you a question that will haunt you. Look at these two images. On one side is a noble knight who goes into the attack knowing he will die, but keeps his honor. On the other side is an English archer who safely shoots him from afar, like at a shooting range, and then loots the corpse. Who is right? We are used to thinking that progress is always good, that efficiency is the main virtue. But haven't we lost something important in that mud at Crécy? Hasn't our civilization, built on the principles of victory at any cost, become just as cold and soulless as that autumn wind that blew over the corpses of the French nobility? Or is nobility just a beautiful fairy tale for suicides, and only those willing to discard morality for survival survive? Decide for yourself. But remember, every time we choose efficiency over humanity, somewhere in the darkness of history, the ghost of an English archer nods approvingly, drawing the string of his deadly bow.